The call came while I was finalizing a presentation for my biggest client. My grandmother had passed away. I sat motionless at my desk, my phone still pressed against my ear as Father delivered the news in his usual matter-of-fact tone. The funeral's on Saturday. Your mother's handling the arrangements. No, how are you holding up? No acknowledgement that Grandma Eliza had practically raised me while my parents were busy with their careers and my brother's endless sports tournaments. Just the practical details, delivered without emotion. I'll be there tomorrow, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to help with the arrangements. No need, your mother has it under control. That was Father, always dismissive of my offers to help, as if I couldn't possibly contribute anything of value. I was 32 years old with a successful career in marketing, my own home, and a life I'd built entirely on my own. But in his eyes, I was still the little girl who couldn't quite measure up to her golden boy brother. I'm coming anyway, I insisted. Grandma Eliza would want me there. A pause, then a sigh. Fine. Let yourself in when you arrive. We'll probably be at the funeral home. I hung up and stared at my computer screen. The marketing campaign I'd been working on suddenly meaningless. Grandma Eliza had been my rock, my confidant, the one person who saw me for who I was, not who my parents wanted me to be. While Mom and Dad shuttled my brother Miles from football practice to baseball tournaments, Grandma taught me to bake, read me stories, and helped me with my homework. She attended every school play, every debate tournament, every academic awards ceremony that my parents were too busy to attend. You're special, Natalie, she'd tell me. Different from your brother, but just as valuable. Don't ever forget that. But my parents had always made it clear that they had different standards for their children. Miles got a car for his 16th birthday. I got a used bicycle. Miles's college tuition was paid in full. I worked 3 jobs to supplement my partial scholarship. Miles's business ventures, all 5 failed attempts, received generous investments from my parents. My request for help with a down payment on my first home was met with lectures about financial responsibility. The double standard was so blatant it was almost comical. Almost. I called my boss, Vivian, and explained the situation. Unlike my parents, she immediately expressed her condolences and insisted I take as much time as I needed. Family comes first, Natalie. The Harrison account can wait. Thank you, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I've already finished the presentation. I'll email it to you before I leave. Don't worry about that. Just take care of yourself and give yourself space to grieve. I wished my parents could show even a fraction of the compassion my boss had just demonstrated. After hanging up, I quickly packed a bag, locked up my apartment, and drove the 3 hours to Meadowbrook, the small town where Grandma Eliza had lived her entire life. The drive gave me time to reflect on my relationship with my grandmother. Unlike my parents, who were always focused on appearances and achievements, Grandma Eliza valued kindness, intelligence, and integrity. She taught me that true success wasn't measured by bank accounts or trophies, but by the lives you touched and the difference you made. When I was 16 and devastated by my parents' decision to skip my debate championship to attend Miles's regional baseball game, which his team lost, Grandma Eliza was there, cheering louder than anyone when I took first place. When I graduated college with honors and my parents could only talk about Miles's new business venture during what should have been my celebration dinner, Grandma Eliza pulled me aside and gave me a beautiful vintage watch that had belonged to her mother. For the woman who knows the value of time, she'd said, fastening it around my wrist. You've used yours wisely, my dear. I touched the watch now as I drove, feeling its familiar weight against my skin. Grandma Eliza had understood me in a way my parents never had, or never tried to. Grandma's house looked exactly the same as it always had, warm, inviting, filled with books and handmade quilts and the lingering scent of cinnamon. I let myself in with the key she'd given me years ago, half expecting to hear her call out from the kitchen. The silence was deafening. I found my parents and Miles in the living room, surrounded by papers. Mom was organizing documents into neat piles, while Dad made notes on a legal pad. Miles lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. Natalie, Mom acknowledged without looking up. We didn't expect you until tomorrow. I left as soon as I could, I said, setting down my overnight bag. What are you doing with Grandma's papers? Just getting things in order, Dad replied. The lawyer's coming tomorrow to discuss the will. Her will? I moved closer, trying to see what they were sorting through. Shouldn't we wait for the lawyer before going through her documents? We're her executors, Mom said sharply. We're just organizing, not making any decisions. I nodded, unconvinced. Can I help? No need. Dad's standard response. Why don't you go through her personal items? Decide what you might want to keep as mementos. Relegation to the sentimental tasks. Typical. But I didn't argue. Instead, I headed upstairs to Grandma's bedroom, the one place in the house that was truly hers. I sat on her bed, running my hands over the quilt she'd made, fighting back tears. The bedside table drawer contained her reading glasses, a romance novel with a bookmark halfway through, and a small notebook. I opened it, recognizing her elegant handwriting immediately. My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. Don't grieve too long, my sweet girl. I've had a wonderful life. There are things you should know. Your parents won't tell you, so I must. The blue box in my closet contains documents you'll need. Take it now before they find it. I've always seen how they favor Miles. It's not right, but they're blind to their own behavior. I've tried to make things more balanced in my will, but I fear they'll find a way around my wishes. They always do. Be strong, be smart, and remember how much I love you. Grandma Eliza. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. Grandma had known. All these years, she'd seen the favoritism, the double standards. She'd tried to protect me in her quiet way. The blue box was exactly where she said it would be, hidden beneath old photo albums on the top shelf of her closet. I took it down, my heart pounding. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, and a copy of her will, dated 3 years earlier. According to these documents, Grandma had substantial assets. Her house, worth about $450,000, investment accounts totaling nearly $300,000, and a vacation cottage on the lake worth another $200,000. The will stated clearly that the house was to go to me, the investments were to be split equally between me and Miles, and the lake cottage was to go to Miles alone. It seemed fair, more than fair, considering Miles was getting the vacation property outright. I would have been happy with this arrangement. But as I read further, my blood ran cold. There was a letter from my parents to Grandma, dated just 6 months ago, asking her to reconsider her will. Miles was in financial trouble again. His latest business venture had failed spectacularly, leaving him with massive debt. They suggested that Grandma sell her house and the lake property, using the proceeds to help Miles, while keeping the investments for her living expenses. Grandma's response, attached with a paperclip, was firm but kind. My dear ones, while I understand your concern for Miles, I cannot in good conscience sell assets that I've promised to my grandchildren. Miles's financial difficulties are of his own making, and bailing him out repeatedly only enables his poor decisions. Natalie has never asked me for money, despite receiving far less support than her brother throughout her life. The arrangements in my will stand. With love, Mom. So they had tried to convince Grandma to change her will to benefit Miles, and she had refused. I felt a surge of gratitude for her strength, followed immediately by suspicion. Why were my parents so anxiously going through her papers before the lawyer arrived? I found a small leather-bound journal beneath the will. It was filled with Grandma's observations about our family dynamics, dating back to when Miles and I were small children. Reading her words was like having someone finally validate feelings I'd been carrying for decades. September 12th, 1997. Richard and Patricia came for dinner with the children. 10-year-old Miles broke my antique vase while playing ball in the house, despite being told not to. Richard laughed it off as boys being boys and told me not to worry about it. 7-year-old Natalie spent the evening helping me bake cookies and set the table. She works so hard for their approval, but they barely notice. June 24th, 2003, Natalie's high school graduation today. She was valedictorian, gave a beautiful speech about perseverance. Richard and Patricia spent most of the ceremony discussing Miles's baseball scholarship. The contrast in how they treat their children becomes more obvious with each passing year. I fear what this is doing to both of them. Natalie learning she must excel to barely be acknowledged. Miles learning he needn't try at all to be adored. December 1st, 2012. Another investment in one of Miles's harebrained schemes. This time, some tech startup that doesn't seem to have a clear business model. Meanwhile, Natalie has been struggling to make rent while finishing her master's degree. When I suggested they help her equally, Richard became defensive. Miles needs our support. Natalie's always been independent. As if being self-sufficient is something to be punished rather than praised. I wiped away tears as I tucked the journal into my bag along with the blue box. Grandma had been my silent advocate all along, seeing the injustice, but limited in her power to correct it. Now it was up to me to protect her wishes, and myself. I tucked the blue box into my overnight bag and went back downstairs. The scene in the living room had changed subtly. The piles of papers were gone, replaced by cups of coffee and forced smiles. "Find anything special upstairs?" Mom asked, her voice overly casual. "Just some photos and books I'd like to keep," I lied. "Did you finish with the papers?" "Just preliminary organization," Dad said smoothly. "The real work will start after we meet with the lawyer." I nodded, playing along. "When is the meeting?" "Tomorrow at 10, Mom replied. "Gerald Hoffman from downtown. He's been handling our affairs for years." "But not Grandma's affairs," I noted silently. According to the documents I'd found, her lawyer was Sofia Rodriguez from a firm across town. Something was very wrong. That evening, we had a tense dinner of takeout Chinese food. Mom and Dad dominated the conversation with funeral arrangements and reminiscences about Grandma Eliza that seemed performative rather than heartfelt. Miles continued to check his phone every few minutes, barely participating. "Remember when Grandma visited us in Phoenix that Christmas?" Mom said, reaching for the fried rice. "She brought those handmade ornaments for the tree." "And her famous gingerbread cookies," Dad added with a nod. "Always thinking of others, that was Eliza." I pushed my food around my plate, fighting the urge to challenge their superficial memories. They hadn't known Grandma Eliza, not really. They hadn't sat with her on countless afternoons while she shared stories of her youth, or helped her garden on summer mornings, or listened to her wisdom about life and love and finding your own path. "She taught me to make those cookies," I said quietly. "I still bake them every Christmas." "Oh," Mom looked surprised, as if she couldn't imagine Grandma and I having traditions of our own. "That's nice, dear." Miles finally put down his phone. "So, did Grandma leave anything specific for any of us? I could really use some cash right now." The bluntness of his question made me wince, but Mom and Dad merely exchanged glances. "We'll know more after the meeting with Gerald tomorrow," Dad said carefully. "But your grandmother was always generous. I'm sure she's provided for everyone." The calculated neutrality of his response set off alarm bells. They knew exactly what was in that will, or what they wanted to be in it. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue from the drive. In the guest bedroom, I took out my laptop and began researching legal precedents for contesting wills, documenting forgery, and the penalties for fraud in our state. I also sent an email to Sofia Rodriguez, Grandma's real lawyer, asking for an urgent meeting. To my surprise, she responded within the hour, expressing concern that she hadn't been contacted about Eliza's passing and hadn't been called to present the will. We arranged to meet at her office at 8:30 the next morning, before the scheduled meeting with Gerald Hoffman. I waited until everyone had gone to bed before sneaking back downstairs. The papers had been locked in Dad's briefcase, but I knew where he kept the key, in the small ceramic dish on his dresser, the same place he'd kept it my entire life. I opened the briefcase quietly, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside was a new will, dated just 2 months ago. It left everything, the house, the investments, the lake property, to be divided equally between my parents and Miles, with a small bequest of $25,000 to me in recognition of her limited needs and independent lifestyle. My hands shook with rage. Limited needs? Independent lifestyle? They were punishing me for being self-sufficient while rewarding Miles for being a perpetual financial disaster. But that wasn't the worst part. The signature on the will didn't match Grandma's handwriting from her letter, or the previous will. It was close, very close, but the distinctive loop on her E was missing, and the Z in Eliza was formed differently. They had forged Grandma's signature on a new will. I took photos of every page with my phone, careful not to disturb the documents. Then I replaced them exactly as I'd found them and locked the briefcase. Back in my room, I examined the photos more closely. The new will had been witnessed by 2 names I didn't recognize and notarized by someone from my father's bank. It all looked official and proper, unless you knew Grandma's actual signature. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions and plans. By morning, I had a strategy. Sophia Rodriguez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner that I imagined Grandma Eliza had appreciated. She reviewed the documents I'd brought, comparing the signatures with detailed attention. "This is definitely not your grandmother's signature," she confirmed, pushing her glasses up on her nose. "And she was quite explicit about her wishes when we prepared her will 3 years ago. She also amended it last year to add a codicil, naming you as her medical proxy." "That's how I knew she was hospitalized during the time this fake will was supposedly signed," I explained. "The hospital called me when she was admitted for pneumonia. She was on heavy medication for over a week. Definitely not in any condition to be signing legal documents." Sophia's expression darkened. "What you're describing is criminal fraud, Natalie. Are you prepared to pursue this legally? It could mean criminal charges for your parents." I took a deep breath. "I don't want to send my parents to jail, but I won't let them steal what Grandma intended for me either. Is there a middle ground?" She considered this. "Perhaps. Let me attend this meeting with Gerald Hoffman. We'll see how they respond when confronted with evidence of forgery. Sometimes, the threat of legal consequences is enough to bring people to their senses." We arrived at Grandma's house at 9:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Sophia explained to my startled parents that she was Eliza's attorney of record and would be participating in the proceedings. "This is irregular," Dad protested, his face reddening. "We've already engaged Gerald Hoffman to handle Eliza's estate." "On what authority?" Sophia asked calmly. "I have the most recent legal will and testament executed by Eliza Bennett, and I'm registered as her attorney of record with the county." Mom's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "There must be some misunderstanding. Eliza changed her will recently. She discussed it with us." "Did she?" I asked, unable to contain myself any longer. "Because according to her medical records, she was hospitalized and heavily sedated on the date this new will was supposedly signed." The room fell silent. Miles looked confused, glancing between our parents with furrowed brows. "What's going on?" Gerald Hoffman arrived then, a polished, silver-haired man in an expensive suit. He greeted my parents warmly, nodded to Miles, and gave Sophia a surprised look. "Sophia," he said stiffly, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Clearly," she replied with a thin smile. "Yet here I am, representing the interests of my client, the late Eliza Bennett, whose actual will I have in my possession." Hoffman's smile tightened. "I have a more recent will, executed 2 months ago, that supersedes any previous versions." "The will with the forged signature?" I asked. All eyes turned to me, surprised that I'd spoken. "The one allegedly signed when Grandma was in the hospital, unconscious from pneumonia and pneumonia medication?" "That's ridiculous," Dad snapped. "Where would you get her medical records?" I smiled. "Grandma made me her medical proxy last year. The hospital called me when she was admitted. Not you, not Mom, not Miles. Me. Because she trusted me." More silence, then Hoffman cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, young lady. Do you have evidence?" "We do," Sophia stated firmly, opening her briefcase, "including Mrs. Bennett's hospital records, samples of her authentic signature from multiple sources, and a sworn statement from her primary care physician regarding her condition during the period in question." She turned to my parents. "The penalties for forgery and fraud in cases like this can include significant fines and jail time. Is that really the path you want to take?" Miles stood abruptly. "Jail time? What the hell is happening here?" "Our parents forged a will to cut me out and give you more," I explained. "They've been favoring you our entire lives, but this time they broke the law. I didn't know anything about this, Miles said, his face pale. For once, I believed him. Dad's facade of indignation finally crumbled. We were trying to protect the family assets, ensure they went where they were most needed. You mean to Miles? I said flatly. As always. He needs the money more than you do, Mom insisted, tears in her eyes. You've always been independent, always found a way to manage on your own. So you punished me for being responsible, I said bitterly. You rewarded Miles for failing over and over again. We were trying to protect him, Dad argued. You don't need protection. Everyone needs support, Dad. Everyone deserves fairness. The conversation devolved from there. Gerald Hoffman, realizing the precarious legal position he'd put himself in, began distancing himself from the situation, claiming he'd had no knowledge of any forgery. Miles alternated between shock at our parents' actions and indignation that I would potentially cause legal problems for the family. My parents moved from denial to rationalization to desperate negotiation. We could still divide everything equally, Dad suggested. That would be fair, wouldn't it? That's not what Grandma wanted, I replied. She made specific choices about her property, and they should be respected. In the end, we reached a compromise. The legitimate will would be honored, with Grandma's original distributions maintained. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges against my parents for the forgery. Gerald Hoffman would face separate consequences from the State Bar Association. Sophia made sure of that. The aftermath was complex and painful. My parents avoided jail time but were on probation and required to perform community service. The legal fees had devastated their finances. Miles, for once, was innocent of wrongdoing. He genuinely hadn't known about the fake will. But the revelation of our parents' decades of favoritism dealt a blow to our already strained relationship. 3 months after the funeral, I visited my parents at their home. They had been uncharacteristically quiet since the will fiasco, their communications limited to terse texts and brief phone calls. We're selling the house, Dad announced without preamble. Moving to a condo downtown. I nodded, unsurprised. I came to tell you something. I'm selling Grandma's house. Mom looked up sharply. Already? But you loved that house. I do love it. But I've decided to use the money differently. I explained my plan. I was establishing a scholarship fund in Grandma's name for young women pursuing careers in fields where they're underrepresented. The first recipient had already been selected, a brilliant engineering student who reminded me of myself at that age. That's generous, Dad said reluctantly. It's what Grandma would have wanted, I replied. She believed in investing in potential, not just rescuing people from their mistakes. The barb landed. Mom flinched. We were wrong, she admitted quietly. About the will, about how we treated you compared to Miles. We got caught in a pattern and couldn't see what we were doing. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. I accepted it with a nod. What about Miles? I asked. Have you heard from him? They exchanged glances. He's living at the lake cottage, Dad said, talking about turning it into a vacation rental, another business venture. Of course he was. Some patterns never change. I hope it works out for him, I said, and meant it. My resentment toward Miles had faded. He was as much a product of our parents' unbalanced approach as I was, just damaged in a different way. As I prepared to leave, Mom hesitated, then asked, Will we see you for Christmas? I considered the question. The old wounds were still fresh, the betrayal still stinging, but holding on to anger wouldn't heal anything. I need time, I said finally. But maybe next year. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a possibility. A door left slightly ajar. In the months that followed, I focused on building my own life. I used half of the investment money to buy a small but charming house in a neighborhood I'd always loved, putting down roots in a way that felt significant and empowering. The rest I set aside for my future, a cushion of security that my parents had never provided. Sometimes I would take out Grandma Eliza's journal and read her observations, finding comfort in her clear-eyed understanding of our family dynamics. She had seen it all, the favoritism, the double standards, the quiet damage being done to both Miles and me, and had tried in her own way to counterbalance it. One entry in particular became my touchstone. May 15th, 2017. Natalie visited today. She's built such a remarkable life despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges she's faced. There's a strength in her that Richard and Patricia will never understand because they've never had to develop it themselves. She doesn't realize yet that what they see as her independence, something to be taken for granted or even used against her, is actually her superpower. Someday she'll understand that she's the truly fortunate one. Success that comes from within can never be taken away. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of Grandma's house, my house, for the last time. The new owners were moving in tomorrow, a young family with 3 children who would fill the rooms with noise and laughter and new memories. The scholarship fund was thriving, having expanded to support 5 young women in its first year. I'd kept a few meaningful items from the house, Grandma's quilts, her cookbook, the desk where she wrote her letters, but the rest had been sold or donated. My phone buzzed with a text from Miles. Coming to Mom and Dad's for dinner? They invited me too. Awkward? I smiled slightly. Since the will fiasco, Miles and I had developed a cautious truce. We'd never be close, too much history, too many unbalanced scales. But we were learning to be civil, to be family, in our own imperfect way. Not awkward, I texted back. See you at 7. My parents had downsized to their condo, humbled by legal troubles and financial constraints. The experience had changed them. They were more thoughtful now, more aware of their own biases. Our relationship would never be what it should have been, but we were building something new from the ashes of the old. As I locked the door of Grandma's house for the final time, I felt her presence beside me, warm and approving. I had honored her legacy not by clinging to material possessions, but by creating opportunities for others, by seeing potential where it might otherwise be overlooked. You were right, Grandma, I whispered to the empty porch. The real inheritance was never about the money. I walked to my car without looking back. The past was settled. The future was mine to shape on my own terms, just as it had always been. The scholarship dinner was my favorite night of the year. Watching the 5 young women who'd received the Eliza Bennett grant accept their certificates, hearing about their dreams and ambitions, filled me with a sense of purpose that no inheritance could match. This year, my parents sat in the audience. It had been their idea to come, a gesture of support that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. Miles had declined the invitation, but sent a surprisingly generous donation to the fund. Small steps, but meaningful ones. After the ceremony, Mom embraced me awkwardly. Your grandmother would be so proud, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She always saw something special in you. She saw something special in everyone, I corrected gently. She just made sure they knew it. Dad cleared his throat. We got it wrong, Natalie, for a long time. I'm not sure we can ever make it right. Probably not, I agreed. But we can do better going forward. And we were trying. The relationship remained fragile, marked by moments of tension and old habits that died hard. But there was progress too. Recognition, respect, the beginnings of balance. As we parted ways that evening, I thought about Grandma's final gift to me. Not the house or the money, but the clarity to see my family for what it was. Flawed, unfair, but still mine. The strength to demand better treatment, to stand firm against injustice, even when it came from those who should have protected me most. My parents had stolen my inheritance, trying to redirect my grandmother's generosity toward my brother yet again. But in doing so, they had given me something far more valuable. Freedom from their approval, from their unbalanced scales, from their limited vision of who I could be. I had turned the tables not by leaving them with nothing, though legally I could have pursued harsher penalties, but by creating something from nothing, by transforming an inheritance into a legacy, by becoming the person my grandmother always knew I could be. That night, I added a new page to Grandma's journal, continuing the story she had begun. Dear Grandma Eliza, you once told me that the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but strength of character. You were right. The house and investments you left me weren't nearly as valuable as the lessons you taught me, to stand up for myself, to recognize my worth, to build something meaningful that outlasts us all. Your love made me strong enough to face the truth about my family. Your example showed me how to respond with grace rather than bitterness. Your faith gave me permission to forge my own path. The scales may never be fully balanced in this lifetime, but I'm no longer measuring my worth by what others think I deserve. I'm creating my own legacy, just as you created yours. With eternal gratitude, Natalie. And somewhere I was certain Grandma Eliza was smiling.